Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. My name's Ken Horrigan. I'm the President of the Churchill Fellows Association of Queensland and Chair of the Convention Organising Committee. And welcome to the second day of the 2021 National Convention of Churchill Fellows, A Changing World. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Turrbal and Yagara people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, I hope you enjoyed yesterday. There were some fantastic speakers. I'm sure you would have each taken something different away. I particularly enjoyed Britt Anderson's presentation because it took me back to my days as an architecture student many years ago. But it also made me think that there was a lot that I missed yesterday being MC. So the good news is that all or most of our presentations will be available online for the next 3 months. So we've just got to sort through a few issues with some final presenters, but most of them will be. And you'll use the same link that you used to log on today. And you'll go into the same sessions. It'll just be presented a little bit differently. And I know I will be going back and looking at some of those presentations because there's some, they're just so good. I hope you enjoyed the speed networking sessions yesterday afternoon. And also if you're in the Indigenous session, I've been told both were really well attended and both went well. There were some technical issues with the Indigenous session, but they were worked through pretty quickly. I also have been asked to mention that dinner tonight is a ticketed event. So I look forward to seeing you all there, but unless you've got a ticket, it's unfortunately sold out. I hope if you're a visitor to Brisbane, I hope you got out to see some of our lovely city last night. It would have been a perfect evening for our welcome reception, which unfortunately had to be cancelled because of the COVID restrictions. But it was a beautiful evening, so I hope you got to do something fun. Now, and I hope you enjoyed the Events Air experience yesterday. There were some technical issues. I think most have been ironed out, so today should go a lot more smoothly. I should have mentioned yesterday, we have some lovely gifts for our speakers and moderators. And they've been created by Delvine Cockatoo Collins, a First Nations artist and designer who lives and works on Quandamooka country. These original artworks were handmade on Minjerribah, which is North Trebek Island, and will be given to you at dinner tonight if you attend, or will be posted to you separately. We also have really colourful reusable cloth bags for our convention delegates, which were made by volunteers using rescued and dormant textiles as part of the boomerang bag movement. And they really are lovely. These bags will be provided to delegates at dinner this evening as well, or are posted with the gifts to our speakers and moderators. Each bag is unique, and it's a shame that you couldn't all be here to receive them. And in keeping with the sustainability ethos of this convention, the Convention Organising Committee are wearing, they're not red, I know I said they're red, but they're not, they're claret, to correct myself, they're claret coloured t-shirts, originally chosen so the delegates could easily could easily find us in the crowd. But these t-shirts have been created for us by Full Circle Fibres, connecting the links from grower to user to create a journey about finding and using sustainability and ethically sourced fibres, yarns and fabrics. So now I've got that all out of the way. We have a full day ahead of us, so let's get started. I will introduce CEO of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust, Mr. Adam Davey. Mr. Davey has been CEO of the Trust since July 2016. And prior to that, he was a senior public servant with extensive experience in managing large teams working on complex policy and associated government initiatives. Adam has worked for over 10 years with the Commonwealth Department of Health, as well as a wide range of other agencies, including ComSuper, Defence Housing Australia, Medicare Australia, for which he was a public spokesman, the Australian Tax Office, Treasury, and IP Australia. He has a bachelor's degree in communications and is highly regarded for his leadership, strategic direction, creative thinking, and people management skills. Please welcome Adam Davey.
Good morning. I'm Adam Davey, CEO of the Winston Churchill Trust, and I'd like to welcome you to Day 2 of the National Convention of Churchill Fellows, A Changing World, hosted by the Queensland Churchill Fellows Association. I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their cultural, spiritual, and educational practices. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm presenting this morning, the Ngunnawal people from the Canberra region. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Although it's disappointing that I, like so many others, am unable to be in Brisbane today for this convention, it's pleasing that we've been able to use technology to bring people together this way. Our last convention, held in Tasmania in early 2019, was notable for many reasons, including being the first time that the three chairs from the three Churchill Trusts, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, got together and presented at the convention. This convention will also take its special place in the Trust's history, as being the first time that we've brought people together digitally to collaborate, share, learn, and to celebrate being part of a broad network of people who are inspirational, Churchill Fellows, making positive differences in their communities. We often love to refer to Sir Winston's never give in attitude, and I need to congratulate the Queensland Churchill Fellows Association, particularly the organising committee, who've been working incredibly hard on this event for a sustained period. I also thank the Trust team, all speakers and presenters, the event managers, and all participants for making this convention possible and not giving in. The stewardship of our board has been incredibly strong since the inception of the Trust. The responsibility for Sir Winston's legacy through the provision of travelling fellowships for the Australian people was an idea that captured the imagination and determination of Sir Robert Menzies, and that spirit and enthusiasm that was embodied in the Trust's board and management has maintained strong for over 55 years. I would like to acknowledge our life members, selection committee and panel members, regional secretaries and Churchill Fellowship Association committees for your contributions to the success of Churchill Fellowships in Australia. And to our fellowship sponsors and partners, you are doing so much to shape and grow the value and impact of Churchill Fellowships for all Australians. Thank you. Churchill is a name that carries prestige and responsibility. It can motivate, inspire, and push audiences towards action. Today, the Churchill Fellowship brand draws some of its attention from a simple truth. In the man, his successes, though many and substantial, were not without his failures or controversy. He wasn't perfect, but who can claim to be? I see Churchill as a mantra for perseverance, a fighter for the arts, a people's man, and a master of language and wit. These types of attributes are embedded in Churchill Fellowships. We carry on Churchill's lessons as an enabler, a call to something higher and bolder for our fellows, whom we celebrate as representatives of our communities, with adventurous and innovative spirits and a desire to make a world a better place. Churchill Fellows are people whose paths to opportunity is created through passion, not privilege only. People brave and bold enough to take the path less travelled, those with a fire in their belly. For those who possess these characteristics, We're their champion, empowering them on to bigger and bolder things. This past almost 2 years now has been a challenge to the very concept of Churchill Fellowships, to learn globally and inspire locally. The COVID pandemic, it's a dreadful thing, wrecking lives and leading to death. It's isolating, it is disruptive. For the first time in the Trust's history, we did not run a Churchill Fellowship selection round this year. We did, however, for the first time in the Trust's history, allow fellowship research to be undertaken virtually. And this has been very successful for those who have been able to use this method. It surely has a role to play in our future and will open doors to people who might not otherwise be able to travel overseas due to things like disability or caring responsibilities. We've been able to adapt and grow in the face of adversity, and of this I am proud. We have over 200 Churchill Fellowship recipients who are maintaining a positive outlook as they await the opportunity to travel, to learn and connect with people around the world. As the world learns how to live with this infectious disease, we're starting to see hope appear, a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. It is a new world. For our Churchill Fellows, the decision to leave for new adventures may be as bold as the adventure itself. The Trust's focus on supporting and encouraging impact for our fellows has continued to grow. We continue to build our approach to supporting Churchill Fellows after they have returned from their travels. We are working with more fellows to assist them to disseminate their fellowship findings and recommendations. Our approach is continuing to expand beyond financial support. We have some fantastic partnerships that have led us to being able to offer programs such as the Policy Impact Program in partnership with the University of Queensland, and the Global Leadership Practices Program in partnership with Yellow Edge. This year, we have run more virtual events focused on connecting Churchill Fellows and others from various industries and sectors than we ever have before. We've continued to invest in significant effort into building our online fellow profiles with a huge increase in the number of biographies and updates on people's projects. This is making it easier for anyone to search for and find Churchill Fellowship reports and connect with the fellows on any topic. Our partnership with the New Zealand Trust has continued to grow, and we're combining our approach to publishing fellowship reports with the shared aim of maximising the accessibility and potential impact of fellowship findings. We are shortly undertaking a research project to help us to understand how, where, and when we can play an even greater role in maximising the impact of Churchill Fellowships. It's often said that you can't improve what you don't measure. And although impact across such a rich ecosystem of fellowship projects is challenging to measure, I'm confident that the process will provide highly valuable insights. We're also working on several new initiatives aimed at increasing the accessibility and availability of Churchill Fellowships to all Australians, as well as new ways we can support fellows to implement their recommendations. It's an exciting time ahead. I'd like to take this opportunity now for us all to remember someone whose personality in life was firmly woven into the DNA of the Churchill Trust. Her memory lives on in the memories of Churchill Fellows, more than 2,500 of them, whom she assisted with their fellowships and maintained close friendships even after her retirement. Elvie Monday passed away on Tuesday, the 14th of August, 2018. Elvie was the Assistant Executive Officer and ACT Regional Secretary of the Trust. She was first employed by the Trust in 1969 to fill in for 3 weeks and proved to be so indispensable to the organisation that Dr. Eva Middleton, the first Chief Executive of the Trust, asked her to stay on permanently. She worked at the Trust for the following 31 years. Elvie was awarded an OAM in 1993 for her services to the Churchill Trust. She retired from the Trust in 2001. Elvie always claims she received more postcards than anyone else in Canberra because the fellows kept her up to date with all their adventures and achievements from everywhere in Australia and overseas. Elvie admitted to no favourite fellows, saying they are all special, and she took a personal interest in them all. Elvie told another Churchill fellow, journalist Peter Clack, "I get more than most people do out of their jobs. It's the diverse nature of the fellows that makes life interesting." Elvie is greatly missed, but her legacy will live on as part of the Churchill Trust family and continue to live on with much fondness and gratitude in our memories and hearts, and be celebrated through the biennial Elvie Monday Churchill Fellowship. In 2020, Queenslander Dr. Andrew Roosevelt was awarded the Elvie Monday Churchill Fellowship to investigate the origins and history of the modern flora and the likely impacts of climate change. Andrew is Principal Curator and Head of Geosciences in the Queensland Museum, and he will use his Churchill Fellowship to undertake important research into how vegetation responds to climate change over time. We look forward to Andrew undertaking this very special Churchill Fellowship. So on that positive note, I hope that you do enjoy today's proceedings.
Thank you, Adam. It was a pleasure to work with you and your team over the past 2 years to deliver this convention. And we look forward to hearing more about how the Trust is focusing on impact for the future. I would now like to commence the keynote presentations, and I'll introduce our first moderator for the day, Associate Professor Richard Roylance. Dr. Roylance is an eminent staff specialist paediatrician based at Logan Hospital. He has a clinical subspecialty interest in the field of child protection, child abuse prevention, being active in the area at the state, national, and international level. He is an associate professor with the School of Medicine at Griffith University in paediatric medicine. Dr. Roylance is an appointment as a sessional member of the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal since its inception, and has held several senior appointments in government. Dr. Roylance is also chair of the Queensland Regional Selection Committee and a member of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Board. In 1995, he was awarded his Churchill Fellowship to extend his knowledge of child protection, child abuse, in order to better serve the community. Please welcome Associate Professor Roylance.
Thank you. My name is Richard Roylance, and I'm a 1995 Churchill Fellow. As a partial reparation for your sins, both individual and collective, I have been asked to moderate this plenary session of the 2021 Winston Churchill Memorial Trust National Convention. To do so gives me immense pleasure. I must first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we sit in our various geographical diversities, and to acknowledge Indigenous leaders, past, present, and emergent. Importantly, I note that some of the aforesaid leaders are present in this audience and presenting on this stage this weekend. Today is a virtual session in this time of COVID-19. And as I remarked to Professor Karma a few days ago, I, like many of you, did my first year of schooling by scratching my alphabet on a piece of slate using a stone pencil. How things have changed. For those of you who remember Romper Room, in my magic memorial mirror, I can see hundreds of you Churchill Fellows out there in virtual land. In the privacy of your own homes in various stages of dress and undress, watching the proceedings with barely contained eagerness. I like to think that at least one of you is at this moment in a bath, sipping champagne, drawing back on an expensive cigar, and formulating profound thoughts of international import. In the words of Churchill, all great things are simple, and many can be expressed in a single word: freedom, justice, honour, duty, mercy, hope. Over this weekend, I'm certain that we will hear and see much from our Churchill Fellows that will provide practical exemplars of these sentiments made real. Freedom, justice, honour, duty, mercy, and most importantly, in these difficult times, hope. In that spirit, I begin this plenary by inviting our first eminent speaker to the virtual stage. The Honourable Margaret White, AO, is patron and former National Chair of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. She is a former Justice of the Supreme Court of Queensland, and I will draw to your attention that she was the first woman to be so appointed. Margaret was further elevated in 2010 to sit as a Justice on the Appeals Court. Margaret White was appointed as an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2013 in recognition of her extraordinary service to the community. She began a well-earned retirement in 2013, but in August 2016, Margaret was appointed as a Joint Commissioner for the Royal Commission into the Protection and Detention of Children in the Northern Territory. Margaret White has been a dedicated and diligent service of the Trust over many decades, and it gives me much pleasure to ask her to share her wisdom with us today.
Good morning, everyone. May I too acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I am, the Turrbal and Yugara people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to my co-patron, Professor Tom Calmer, AO, and to many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander emerging leaders who I hope may be encouraged and supported to apply for a Churchill Fellowship. May I also join with Ken and Richard in welcoming you to this much anticipated Churchill Fellows Convention, ostensibly in Brisbane, and thank the organising committee for their dedication, determination, and finally, celebrate the vindication of their decision to persevere. In the result, we have a convention fashioned with skill and imagination in which all who wish may participate, from Perth to Tasmania and across the ditch to our friends in New Zealand, and so up the east coast to the beautifully positioned State Library of Queensland. The committee has demonstrated the fundamental essence of a Churchill Fellow: see a problem and fix it. Certainly, Churchill Fellows do not despair and pronounce this to be the worst of times. An essay by C.S. Lewis of Narnia fame is presently doing the rounds as something of a check on hand-rigging in the time of COVID. Written in 1948, when fear of an atomic conflagration was a very real prospect during an increasingly chilly Cold War, Lewis wrote, "In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age?" I'm tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. A changing world? Yes, of course it is, and always has been. But some of the certainties have gone too, and that can be uncomfortable. But keep in mind that French aphorism, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The fundamentals of the human condition rarely change. Some changes we see offer great advances in medical discoveries, for example. Some seem terrible, such as ever more destructive weapons of war. But we can feel confident that Churchill Fellows can be found in the vanguard of the good. There is a great deal about the Churchill Trust which has changed from the heady days of February 1965, when the National Collection swung into action on a Sunday morning, 1 month after Churchill's death. Perceptions of Churchill himself have changed, even in the 6 years since we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Trust, with a marvellous Fellows Convention in Sydney in 2015. But even judged by his own times, some of his views were decidedly unattractive. Churchill was adamantly opposed to female suffrage, and when accosted on the hustings in December 1905 by Sylvia Pankhurst, one of Emmeline's daughters, pestering him to know if the party to which he then belonged would give women the vote if elected in the forthcoming election, Churchill declared, "Nothing would induce me to vote for giving women the franchise. I am not going to be henpecked." A man more indulged by the women in his life, his mother, his wife, and his daughters, can scarcely be imagined. It is thought that Churchill's first encounter with an Australian was with Banjo Paterson, then a war correspondent with the Sydney Morning Herald, in 1899 in Johannesburg during the Boer War when Churchill was 25. The last was a brief meeting with Sir Paul Hasluck when he was Minister for Territories at a reception in London in 1963, 2 years before Churchill died when he was 88. What an extraordinary span of history, from crinolines to Carnaby Street, if you like. It was not for Winston Churchill's well-documented flaws of character and bigotries that hundreds of volunteers mobilised on Collection Sunday in 1965, and many thousands donated to the most successful fundraiser ever to establish the Trust. It was, quite simply, he was seen as the saviour of Western civilisation as we had come to understand what that meant in 1939. In a newspaper not known for its conservative thinking, the Manchester Guardian as it was then known, the following editorial appeared the morning after his death. "In Winston Churchill has died the greatest Englishman of his time, full of years and honour. The days when his shoulders held up the sky are still fresh in the minds of all but the very young. And then he served and saved not only his own countrymen, but the whole free world. Unlike most eminent persons, he can at his death be given at once his place in history. It is not likely that posterity, when it sees him in perspective, will change to any great extent the judgment of his contemporaries. Without Churchill, would Britain have survived in 1940 and 1941? And if Britain had gone down then, could any nation have prevailed against the Nazis and their allies? As I expect most of you know, the idea of travelling scholarships for people from all walks of life as a memorial was Churchill's own. For a man born into a great ducal family, a product of the Victorian era, who loved luxury from the best champagne and cigars to cruises on board Onassis' yacht, his desired memorial was surprising in itself. It was a recognition that there were ordinary people with something extraordinary to contribute, who should be encouraged and developed, and then expected to give back to their communities the fruits of their investigations and travel. A changing world? Yes, indeed. But a glance through the projects of the first fellows suggests some constant themes which have returned decade after decade. Agricultural advancement, farming practices and aspects of food production, prison reform and access to justice, that recurring chestnut has proved hard to crack, notwithstanding some great projects. The export trade, Aboriginal concerns, nursing, medical advances, education, music, theatre, and the visual arts. Amongst the first 49 fellows, 4 came from Papua New Guinea, then a trust territory administered by Australia. 25 years later, what do we see in 1990? Different projects certainly, and some different focus, but overall, not so changed. Degradation of the environment. There continued to be a splendid swathe of music and arts projects, and medical and allied health investigations with a more micro than broad macro focus, reflecting perhaps increasing specialisation and the shorter period of the study program. By 2015, when we celebrated 50 years of the Trust, domestic violence with its many faces and causes was a regular project. Issues relating to refugees appeared. Dementia and prison reform, both regulars, combined to investigate managing dementia in prison. Climate change focused projects began to be seen specifically, although agricultural projects on topics like land degradation were forerunners. Waste and the circular economy emerged as an aspect of thinking more thoughtfully about our world. New initiatives in emergency services have always engaged our fellows, reflective of our geography and demography. The arts continued to be represented, but my impression is that there were fewer applicants from that broad cohort than we had seen in the first 50 years. One absence on a quick review of the fellows was the dropping away of projects with an employment industrial relations focus. In the first 5 to 10 years, there were 9 fellowships to study trade unions and industrial relations. One of the first fellows in 1966 was Barry Unsworth, later Premier of New South Wales, who attended Harvard University for that purpose. There are, in fact, few fellowships broadly relating to politics and public policy generally, although a decade or so ago, a political cartoonist in a daily paper was awarded a fellowship to study this topic during a USA presidential election. I'm not sure what this means, perhaps less engagement with the political process than in other countries. But I do note that a 2020 Churchill Fellow is to investigate good decision-making and probity in grants administration. In short, while there are some constants in the projects, the applicants tend to reflect the emerging issues of the day and offer some original and always thoughtful proposals for resolution. Over the 56 years of the Trust, there have been very few failures. Most have lived up to the expectations which they engendered when selected. Some have become world figures. Others contributed in the national arena, and some made small but important contributions to their community's well-being. Let me conclude by selecting one fellow out of the 4,659 to demonstrate the richness and reach that a fellowship can achieve. Bob Prickett was awarded his fellowship in 1967 to study public health aspects of water supply and sewage in tropical and arid regions, particularly the prevention of waterborne disease. He was then an engineer with the Department of Works in Darwin. He spent a year away in the United States, and on his return, he led the establishment of a water quality criteria program for Australia, based on his fellowship study. Bob, as for so many, regarded his fellowship experience as life-changing, and he and his wife determined to sponsor a Churchill Fellowship to study an aspect of health of Australians. The first was awarded in 1993. Every year since then, a Bob and June Prickett Fellowship has been awarded, sometimes 2. Bob sponsored the 3,000th Fellow in 2006 to investigate strategies to improve organ donor rates in Australia. Bob had wonderful personal relationships with his fellows. They were mutually inspired. Some are no doubt here today. He died a few years ago and left his considerable estate to the Trust. He liked that the Trust was lean in its administration costs, that the selectors were all volunteers, and that the processes of selection were scrupulous. So yes, it's a changing world, and with support like Bob's from all our sponsors and our selector volunteers, our staff at Churchill House, our Churchill Fellows are ready for it.
David Trebek is a 1974 Churchill Fellow and is National Chair of the Board of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. He is the immediate past president of the ACT Divisional Council of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and chair of Australia's Oyster Coast Proprietary Limited, Delos Delta Proprietary Limited, and AOC Oyster Investments Limited. He is an alternate director of the Ginderi Joint Venture Board. David is a former commissioner of the National Water Commission, a former non-executive director of several AXX companies, and former advisor to the local subsidiary of the world's largest shipping company, AP Moller-Maersk. In 1983, he co-founded and was later CEO of ACIL Consulting, from which he retired in 2004. Over the past 2 years, I've had the great personal advantage of witnessing David's calm, thoughtful, and incisive leadership in his role as the National Chair of the Trust during this unique period of social and economic challenge. It would be fair to say that I'm not always an easy person to impress, but David Trebek has done that in spades. I call David to the virtual podium.
Good morning, everyone. This is certainly a convention with a difference, and I'm extremely disappointed not to be attending in person. Members of the organising committee, led by the indefatigable Ken Horrigan and convention organiser Jill Bannon, have suffered more slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Hamlet might have put it, than they deserved. A 6-month delay, continuing uncertainties caused by lockdowns on and off, and finally, the bulk of the convention occurring virtually with a relatively small number of people in physical attendance. For this reason alone, it's tremendous that the convention is going ahead at all. We congratulate and thank the organising committee and others for their dedication and perseverance. And what better theme than a changing world? A changing world indeed. Certainly this has been the Trust's experience over the past 2 years of pandemic. I particularly want to acknowledge and sympathise with our 227 fellows from 2019 and 2020 who are yet to travel. A small number, with our active encouragement and support, have been able to undertake their fellowships virtually with great success. This is one way we are seeking to respond to a changing world. But for the majority, it must be frustrating to be spinning the wheels, not knowing when travel might be possible, and even then, what can be salvaged from original itineraries. Commitment and enthusiasm must, in these circumstances, be difficult to sustain. And yet, judging by the contact our staff at National Office have had, commitment and enthusiasm seem evident in abundance. Typical positivity from Churchill Fellows. How did Sir Winston Churchill view a changing world? Well, first and foremost, he, like very few others in the early 1930s, foresaw the essence of German National Socialism and the nature of the change that Hitler would have imposed if given the chance. Churchill was appalled at the prospect of that type of changing world. For years, he waged a lonely campaign, warning of the risks and urging preparation, for which he was widely derided as a warmonger and ostracised by his colleagues. Time proved him right, of course. And shortly after the war, he was again prescient in identifying the baleful influence of the Soviet Union under Stalin, notwithstanding its enormous contribution to the defeat of Hitler. His famous 1946 speech, delivered after receiving an honorary degree from Westminster College at Fulton, Missouri, warned that an iron curtain has descended across the continent, and behind that line lie all the capitals of the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. This is not the liberated Europe we fought to build up. More generally, in relation to change, he observed, admittedly in relation to his own political oscillations over the years, that to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often. He also advised that we must take change by the hand, or rest assuredly, change will take us by the throat. And finally, perhaps with some advice relevant to our weird existence today, if you are going through hell, keep going. Fortified with some suitable Churchillian exhortations, I would now like to outline some of the Trust's thinking for the changing world ahead. Naturally, we've been closely monitoring the official statements regarding future international travel, which we hope will be possible sometime in 2022. The best source of advice is the Smart Traveller website hosted by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. However, we are mindful that it is not just decisions that the Australian government takes which will be crucial. Decisions taken by other governments will also affect how and where fellows can travel, while a range of commercial decisions will also be relevant. For example, we've all recently observed flaky airline schedules, with flights frequently cancelled at the last minute, even if for understandable reasons. This is a new element of uncertainty, which none of us have encountered previously. Then there is the question of how insurance policies will be reset, at what cost, and with what exemptions or let-out clauses. It may be that travel bubbles, such as the on-again, off-again one to New Zealand, possibly extended to Singapore and later the United Kingdom and United States, will be implemented. This might enable a staged approval to travel to selected countries. It may, in turn, necessitate that for the first time, we allow broken travel, that is, two separate trips rather than one continuous journey, which, for cost and other reasons, has been our strict policy to date. At the other end of the scale, we may be forced to deny travel approval to certain countries where we judge the risks to be too great. A different option may be to allow domestic travel in some circumstances. Again, this has not been permitted to date, and indeed our constitution stipulates that fellowships are for overseas travel. Constitutional amendment would therefore be required. Such change to the Constitution always needs careful thought about unintended consequences, but it is feasible. Prior to COVID, we had already been thinking along these lines in the case of applicants from more remote locations, or those with a disability or substantial caring responsibilities. This would be consistent with one of our strategic pillars, quote, to award fellowships to a diverse range of people from all walks of life based on merit. We don't yet know how any of this will play out, but you can be assured that our two guiding principles will be doing our utmost to allow travel to resume as soon as possible, subject to the risks involved, and a transparent approach in conveying new rules so that fellows have as much time as possible to plan and reschedule. This year, we made the unwelcome decision not to have a fellowship application round, the first time in the Trust's 55-year history. With 2 years of untravelled fellows now banked up, most of whom presumably will require adjustments to their itineraries, there will be a substantial workload on the Trust staff as they help fellows make these adjustments. Given this increased workload, will there be an application round in 2022? I hope so, but the board has not yet taken a decision and will be considering the issues shortly. As well as some of the new possibilities noted above, one option would be to allow hybrid fellowships, that is, involving a combination of some travel and some virtual engagement. After all, we're all Zoom experts these days. In weighing up these options, the board will be mindful of what is best from the Trust's point of view and that of individual fellows, and what the cost implications are likely to be. We can be confident that overseas travel will in time be possible again, and travel will remain integral to the experience and value of a Churchill Fellowship. For the second part of these remarks, I'd like to report on some of the activities we have been pursuing over the past 12 months or so. I'm sure that most of you are aware of the Policy Impact Program, which has been an initiative of the Trust and the University of Queensland. It fits squarely into another of the strategic pillars of supporting and developing Churchill Fellows. The culmination for the first cohort of 11 fellows was a presentation of their work at Parliament House in March this year. A professional document was prepared containing a distilled version of the work of each fellow. Extensive media interest was generated on the day and subsequently. There were also opportunities for fellows to meet with government officials and members of Parliament, all with the objective of making the fellows' work and their policy proposals more widely known. The interest generated has been very encouraging. A call for applications for the second round of the program has recently occurred, from which a new cohort of Policy Impact Program fellows will be selected, and I'm sure that they'll be equally worthy to the first. Over the past 12 months, we have reflected on worldwide criticism of a number of historical figures, including Churchill, when their exploits are judged against contemporary norms. Another of the Trust's pillars is to enhance the legacy of Sir Winston Churchill while being open to contemporary public perceptions and constructive debate. So, how best to respond? While we are, of course, unequivocal in our admiration for Churchill's achievements, especially his leadership during the Second World War and his enduring values, some of his views can now appear awkward or wrong, including on matters of race. In a somewhat analogous situation, President Emmanuel Macron recently gave a speech marking the 200th anniversary of Napoleon's death, a person he described as both eagle and ogre. He told his audience, "You are not responsible for France's past, nor are you its guardians. It comes to you as an inheritance without a testament attached. You may choose to love it, and so too you may choose to criticise it. But first you must learn it, facing it directly and as a whole, with a love of knowledge, resisting the temptation to judge yesterday by today." I think those words rather nicely capture the essence of the challenge. Churchill's life, of course, has been more comprehensively documented, warts and all, than almost any other person. It is a veritable open book. While the main focus has naturally been on his positive achievements, his flaws have hardly remained secret. Few people are paragons of virtue without blemish, especially when viewed from the benefit of hindsight or from the comfort of an armchair, and Churchill wasn't. A leader of his stature and achievement clearly had optimism and self-confidence in abundance, not to mention strength, both physical and mental, which enabled him to withstand the pressures and stress to which he was subjected over many years. But Churchill also had well-known bouts of depression and self-doubt throughout his life. As a contribution to constructive and thoughtful debate, the Trust commissioned a series of articles offering contemporary assessments of Churchill. The authors are one of our patrons, Tom Calmer, South Australian Fellow Lainey Anderson, and Still to Travel Victorian Fellow Susan Carland. By taking this initiative, the Trust demonstrates it is open to a continuing appraisal of the person in whose name we operate. The articles appear on the Trust's website, and I encourage you to read them if you have not already done so. The Trust is active in identifying partnerships where these can be mutually beneficial. I've already mentioned the one we have with the University of Queensland. We have recently developed an important partnership with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, AATSIS, to produce a podcast series, The Voice of Power. This features 11 Indigenous Churchill Fellows exploring how First Nations peoples have stood up to right the wrongs of the past and to forge strong futures. In a related initiative, last evening, as part of this convention, we held a virtual session with Indigenous Fellows to form an Indigenous Churchill Fellows Network or alumni group, and I look forward to its development over time. In a different type of partnership, we are collaborating with the New Zealand Churchill Trust and are hosting their Fellows reports on our website, initially from 2015 onwards, but expanding over time. This will make it easier for Fellows on both sides of the Tasman to engage with each other for mutual benefit. And I'm delighted that the chair of the New Zealand Trust, Tracey, will be speaking shortly, and that she and a number of New Zealand Fellows are participating in this convention. Finally, a logical question to ask is, what impact does a Churchill Fellowship have for the recipient, for the country? What impact have Churchill Fellowships in total had? We've all heard many Churchill Fellows describing their fellowship as a life-changing experience, just as we can identify numerous examples where a fellowship has been a catalyst for a major career enhancement or a major benefit for society. Not the sole catalyst, perhaps, but it's certainly a contributing one. But what about the overall impact across all years, among all fellows, across all categories of activity? It would be terrific to know, but it is, of course, a devilish question to answer. However, another of the Trust's strategic pillars is understanding and enhancing the impact of Churchill Fellowships. So we have an obligation to try and gain some insight on the matter. To this end, we have just embarked on a research project involving a well-credentialed consultancy firm to probe the question. I don't pretend we'll come up with the ultimate answer, or indeed incorporate the experience of all our 4,000 plus fellows over their careers. But I do look forward to learning the insights which the project will uncover. And I hope that many of those attending this convention will be able to participate in the research. In this brief address, I've referred to 4 of the 5 strategic pillars of the Trust. These were reviewed and refined by the board earlier this year. I can do no better than to list them all, as they guide our operations and priorities day in, day out. First, awarding fellowships to a diverse range of people from all walks of life based on merit. Second, supporting and developing Churchill Fellows. Third, enhancing the profile of Churchill Fellowships and the legacy of Sir Winston Churchill. Fourth, understanding and enhancing the impact of Churchill Fellowships. And finally, continue being sustainable and contributing to public value. They are helping the Trust to navigate and perhaps to create a changing world. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing the remaining segments of the convention.
Dr. Dimity Dornan, AO, is a 1992 Churchill Fellow. Dimity is a speech pathologist, a researcher, and a highly successful entrepreneur. She is chair of Bionics Queensland and a fellow of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. In 1992, Dimity established Hear and Say as the leading not-for-profit assisting children with hearing loss learning to listen and speak. Her particular expertise is with surgically implantable hearing technology, the Bionic Ear. I have known Dimity from my earliest days as a fellow, and she continues to impress with her gracious advocacy for children and adults with hearing impediments with the associated risk for preventable social and educational disadvantage. Dimity Dornan manifests as a primordial force when wrangling government, non-government, and business gorgons in achieving her goal for better outcomes and enhanced opportunities for the vulnerable. I call Dimity to the virtual stage.
Hello, my name is Dimity Dornan, and I'm going to talk to you about my Churchill Fellowship trip of 1992, for which I'm entirely grateful because it led me from the improbable to the incredible. Let me tell you all about it. On the way from my Churchill Fellowship, I went from learning about teaching deaf children to listen and speak, and learning about the bionic ear here in Australia, and then leading on to the science of bionics, which has completely changed my life. The bionic ear was the world's first successful neuromodulation device, one that interfaces with the brain and the nervous system and makes changes, and in the case of children, forever. The cochlear implant or bionic ear was invented by Professor Graham Clark, who was an ENT surgeon here in Australia, and his father had a pretty severe hearing loss, and Graham wanted to help his father, so he was trying to invent some sort of an electronic device which could be inserted in the cochlea, the part of his dad's ear or hearing system that was damaged, and help him to hear again. So what he did is he was working all around the area, but he couldn't find the missing link. And one day he was babysitting his children on the beach, and he picked up a conch shell off the beach and a blade of beach grass. And he threaded the blade of beach grass through the shell and found that it was just like the sort of device that he needed to bypass those damaged hearing cells. And so what he did is he created an electrode array that linked up with lots of other parts of the system. And finally, his dad would be able to hear with the cochlear implant or bionic ear back in the 70s. And there's been no moonshot device to equal it in the last 50 years. And so from this, we know that the brain is the true organ of hearing, as it is with other senses, but the ear is the pathway into the brain. And especially with children, we had no way of accessing their brain to teach them to listen, to understand, and to speak until the cochlear implant or bionic ear came along. This is a lovely story about Abigail, who is hearing her first sound. And she's at Hear and Say, which is the program that I started on returning from my Churchill Fellowship to help deaf children to learn to listen and speak using the latest hearing technology. So you'll see in the first picture, Abigail hears a sound coming from a computer. She's excited and tells her dad, and then she turns around to tell her mum and to see and be rewarded by a puppet that pops out of a puppet box. And this is the way that we help children to learn to hear their first sounds. From the bionic ear came the area of bionics, the science of bionics, and that's been developing quite rapidly over the last 10, 20 years. Bionics is a mix of medicine, science, and engineering. And bionic devices can interface with the electrical systems of the human body, just like Graham Clark's bionic ear does. In the 1970s, the television show The $6 Million Man was a rebuilt astronaut who was badly interested in a flight crash, and his right arm and both legs and left eye were replaced with bionic implants that enhanced his performance. What was seen in the 1970s as improbable, if not impossible, now is very probable and is actually happening in a number of places in the world. And Australia is very much at the forefront of all of this science of bionics. As time moves on, the area of bionics is expanding rapidly into two main areas: exobionics, which includes all the neural implants, the artificial organs, and the limb prostheses. And now we have also autobionics, which are the biofabricated implants and bionic interventions to restore, replace, or regenerate human physiology. And as all this was happening around 2013, I developed the Human Bionics Interface Alliance, a national group that would start to accelerate the bionics industry. Around 2015-16, I decided that Queensland and Queenslanders were being left behind, so I formed Bionics Queensland, which is now headed by CEO Dr. Robin Stokes, who's developed a bionics challenge that will help, that will allow us to give awards or prizes for people who are doing bionics inventions and innovations. So the Bionics Challenge was the first ever dedicated bionics deep tech competition for talented innovators, startups, and R&D leaders. And this year in 2021, our first national Bionics Challenge has resulted in some amazing innovations, including a bionics larynx and a bionic pancreas, which has won the national prize. I'd like now to tell you a little bit about some of the other magic that's coming from bionic innovations, and which I'm very pleased to be involved in, and working out how to help them to accelerate their device to market. This is an example of Brody, who was in a car accident, and he needed a multi-pronged solution because he had a lot of injuries. So he now has a biocompatible skull implant that is becoming his own, a cochlear implant or a bionic ear, and he's hoping to receive an advanced bionic limb. Here we have Dr. Peter Ford, who's working with his brain-computer interface. He's a Queenslander again, who's developed a brain-computer interface called a neuronode trilogy, which is developed by his company, Control Bionics, and is delivering remarkable results for people who can't communicate and who wanted to use an augmentative and alternative communication system using a tablet. And it helps people who are living with motor neuron disease, spinal muscular dystrophy, cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, and locked-in syndrome. An amazing advance for science. This is young Maya, who was born with a microtia where her outer ear failed to develop. And she has now been fitted with a surgical solution, but we're also working on a biofabricated solution where for other children coming along, their microtia could be healed by the addition of a biofabricated external ear, which would eventually become part of her own body. So advances in tissue engineering, 3D printing and biofabrication are all part of bionics, autobionics. Here's another study with a delightful picture. Professor Colette Mackay from the Bionics Institute of Australia, based in Melbourne, and she's measuring how much sound babies' brains can hear. And she's using functional near-infrared spectroscopy to try and work out how much sound they've heard and what type of sound, because the sooner we can provide hearing impaired babies with the best possible care, the earlier they can learn to speak and the brighter their future will glow. Early bionic eyes have also been developed by the Bionics Institute and a number of other groups. Here in Queensland, the Bivacor or artificial heart was developed by Daniel Timms, a plumber's son from Bundaberg, who's developed a total artificial heart designed to take over the complete function of a person's heart if it's failing. It's now in the final stages of testing and development, but unfortunately this device had to move offshore to Texas because Australia couldn't fund it, and that's one of the impetuses that I had, the catalyst for developing Bionics Queensland. Another Australian has developed the Stentrode, a different type of brain-computer interface. The Stentrode is like an expanded paperclip which sits in a blood vessel next to the brain and records electrical activity from the motor cortex, the part of the brain that controls movement. It relies on a wireless solution implanted in the chest to provide high-resolution neural data transmission and a brain-controlled hands-free app platform that translates brain impulses into a standardized digital language. Absolutely amazing. This is a friend of mine, Matthew Ames, who's an environmental engineer who's had an accident in that he had sepsis following a sore throat and had to have all his limbs amputated at the top. He's now been fully renovated and is using a bionic ear, 2 prosthetic legs screwed onto titanium osseo-integrated rods into his legs, his leg bones, and similar in his arms, only he has bionic arms, which he has trouble sourcing all the various pieces that keep it working from all over the world. So that's another reason why I developed Bionics Queensland. Lastly, I have 2 wonderful Australians, both Queenslanders again, Professor Alan Mackay-Sim, who was Australian of the Year in 2017, and who developed a way of using nasal cells, turning them into stem cells, and other scientists have used that research to heal someone with a spinal cord injury, and there's a lot of work happening around that at Griffith University on the Gold Coast. And someone else down there, Dr. Dinesh Palapana, who was Australian of the Year for Queensland in 2021, for his work in assisting with the research into helping to return movement to people who've had a spinal injury. So as a finish, I'd like to say that from the improbable to the incredible is possible. Here's young Zoe as she speaks on a stage. She has profound hearing loss. She wears 2 bionic ears, and she's being interviewed and talking to a very large audience at a ball. So we have the most amazing things that are possible these days. So I'd like to say that thank you for listening to me, and we have a wonderful, incredible future ahead of us. Thank you.
Joy Tracey is the chair of the New Zealand Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. She is a director and business consultant specialising in business strategy and performance improvement. As a chartered accountant, she has worked for and with not-for-profit Crown entities, primary sector organisations, commercial manufacturing and service industries. Joy is a chartered member of the Institute of Directors and a chartered fellow of Governance New Zealand. Joy's background includes commercial director roles across the private and not-for-profit sector, and further governance roles in community, arts and health organisations, including being the previous chair of Women on Boards New Zealand. She is national organiser for the Sir Paul Callaghan Eureka Youth STEM Awards. Unlike our other speakers this morning, I've not had the privilege of extended personal interactions with Joy. Nevertheless, her achievements, as I have just outlined them, speak for themselves. I would suggest that a practical manifestation of her devotion to duty has been that despite her mother tongue being English, she has undertaken to deliver this presentation today in Australian so that it will be more easily accessible to us, her cousins across the watery divide. I call Joy to the virtual podium.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. E noho ana o ki te whanganui atara, ko Joy Tracey tōku ingoa. Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, presenters, and Churchill Fellows here and online, warm greetings to you all. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and the many different peoples across Australia and New Zealand. In particular, the Turrbal people whose land Brisbane sits on today. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to First Nations people present today. I am Joy Tracey, the chair of the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust in New Zealand. I am honoured to present to this Churchill Fellows Conference. It's disappointing that I'm unable to be with you in person in Brisbane. Wellington's COVID-free, as is Brisbane. Well, this week anyway. Yet it's not possible to freely travel, even fully vaccinated. The prospect of being marooned on your side of the Tasman with lottery-style odds to get back to New Zealand just doesn't appeal, even with your sunshine. What a changing world indeed. Today I'll recap a brief history of the New Zealand Winston Churchill Memorial Trust and the unique challenges that we face, before updating you on the positive progress we're making in changing the operation of the New Zealand Trust. Let me share my screen. The Winston Churchill Memorial Trust helps everyday New Zealanders to pursue their passions and connect with like-minded communities overseas. Like Australia and the United Kingdom, the New Zealand's Trust was founded in 1965 from public donations and government funds to honour the memory of Sir Winston Churchill. In our case, the government contributed funds of £50,000, with the public contributing £182,000. To protect their share of the funding, the government created an Act of Parliament to ensure that the trust funds were managed prudently. The Act is extremely prescriptive. It requires 9 trustees who are appointed by the Governor-General on the recommendation of the Minister with a maximum tenure of 6 years. The Act's powers are to administer the trust, consider applications and make grants, increase public awareness, and it requires that capital funds be held and invested. Authorised expenditure is basically only permitted for fellowship grants and payment of reasonable costs for administration and travel. There's a provision that still exists. The board can only spend funds in any one year on anything that is not authorised in the Act to a total of no more than £100. This requirement still stands 55 years after the Act was put in place. $200 doesn't buy us very much now. A Statute Amendments Act passed last year now allows us to use paid marketing and social media to promote the fund and the work that we do. Social media, of course, didn't exist and hadn't even been thought of in 1965. Getting any legislation amended is difficult, and this is our biggest issue. The Department of Internal Affairs is responsible under the Act for managing the Trust's administration. We have an excellent part-time advisor who oversees our administration and manages the grants processes. We also have a part-time finance manager who manages our accounts and is the liaison for our outsourced investment management. However, we are mere noise in the giant machinery of the Department of Internal Affairs, DIA. They have revenues of $500 million, over 1,850 full-time equivalent staff, and they're a very large ministry responsible for different sectors of the community, people and business, central and local government, including ministerial expense reporting. We fall under the community advice and grants. The largest grant maker is lotteries, and they will distribute over $390 million of funds in 2022. By comparison, the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust has investments of $5 million. We provide annual grants in normal times of $100,000, and we have direct operating costs of $35,000. The appropriation for administering us is $120,000 a year. We do not have the size, profile, or risk to attract attention and therefore resources. So how does our trust function? Our average fellowship grant is only $6,500 to $10,000. We require the fellows to contribute 20% of their costs. We permit travel up to 3 months, and all trustees view all applications. We get 50 to 70 applications a year. We have written applications submitted through the DIA grant software, and we do not conduct interviews. So we're reliant on formal letters of support and additional web searches to assure ourselves that the applicant can meet the information delivery and the communication requirements of the fellowship. With no alumni association, we also lack support from active and enthusiastic fellows. We've had several attempts to stand up a fellows association over the years, and there's great interest until the fellows are asked to volunteer time or contribute to the costs of running such an association. What have we tried? Given our respect for your success, previous New Zealand chairs have attended these fellow conferences, bringing back ideas to lift the Trust's impact in New Zealand. One that's been very successful for you is partnering with others to leverage your reach. New Zealand has set up several partnerships in the past 8 years. We have one strong partnership still operating, the Winston Churchill McNeish Writers Fellowship. This biennial literary fellowship funds promising authors to travel and study within a foreign-speaking country. It was created by the late New Zealand author, Sir James McNeish. Sir James and Lady McNeish contributed $50,000 as a tagged fund, and then after his death, a further $30,000 has been generously donated from his estate. Income from the fund is topped up from the general trust income. The McNeish family retain an active involvement in the partnership, and they review and endorse a selected applicant for each Writers' Fellowship. This photo features Carolyn Gillam and Dame Patsy Reddy. Carolyn was the 2017 McNeish Literary Fellow. She travelled to Norway to live amongst the Indigenous Sami people, writing a novel on their struggles in the 1970s and 80s against a hydroelectric dam. The Tasmanian Conference provided the opportunity for my previous chair, Bronwyn Smits, and myself to meet with management, some of your board, and fellows from the Australian Churchill Trust. Those meetings have given rise to considerable discussion within our own New Zealand board, the Department of Internal Affairs, and the Churchill Trust as to how the New Zealand Trust could operate more effectively and how we could be supported. There's an accepted realisation that we are not sustainable as we are currently operating. This Jack Welch quote provides a stark reminder that we are being overtaken by change, and unless we innovate, we will become obsolete. The impact of COVID on international travel has created significant disruption to what has been the core of our program. Fellows waiting to travel, we've only got 16, which is small in comparison to the Australian and the United Kingdom numbers. The destinations we're waiting to visit are the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Denmark, Scotland, Thailand, China, Canada, Alaska, Vanuatu, Guam, New Guinea, and Tonga. We cover diverse parts of the earth. Travel will also be more expensive when it resumes. And if a fellowship was worthy pre-COVID, then it should not be constrained by cost in the new world. Regular contact with our fellows confirms our recipients are still committed, although awardees' circumstances may change. Timelines and destination, access to our countries remains uncertain. So firstly, what are we trying to do with this vision for change? We're trying to create a future-proof, fit-for-purpose, sustainable Winston Churchill Trust. Why do we need to change when we're actually achieving delivery of fellowships as per the basic requirements of the Act? The rationale driving this is the government appropriation funds the trust through one of its departments under a shared services model. There's no capacity to increase services. Attempts to renegotiate the MOU have not been successful for the trust's desired increased needs, particularly in communications and promotion. Not surprising when our appropriation is $120,000. There's increased reliance on board member skills to deliver in these key areas. Trustees have a defined 6-year maximum tenure, so anyone providing essential promotional skills may not have a successor with sufficient capacity to continue this voluntarily. So looking at where we are in New Zealand against Australia and the United Kingdom, it has become very obvious that our biggest constraint is the 55-year-old Act of Parliament. But while fit for purpose in the late 1960s, it has long since outlived its usefulness. Reviewing history and working with DIA, it is apparent that getting the Act amended would be an impossibly slow process. There is little political risk with the existing legislation, which makes it unlikely that there'd be any interest from an MP in championing the change. So how do we demonstrate to the Minister the benefits of change while providing assurance that any change will be successful and still deliver the Trust's vision? We'll have to use overseas models from the United Kingdom and Australia, which are well established, to demonstrate how we could similarly continue and enhance the work of the Trust if the Act was repealed. This change idea has been developed with the board, DIA collaboration, and been introduced to the Minister. In 2020, the then Minister for the Community and Voluntary Sector advised the board that the government supported the proposed operational changes. While this is not approval, it's acknowledgement that the idea is being considered and socialised at the right level. Any such change will not be rapid. Repeal of the Act will likely take more than 5 years, even with support. So how will we introduce this operational change? Well, let's look to the medium term, well, short to medium term. We're endeavouring to build closer links with the Australian Trust. We're testing the New Zealand Fellows Reports database being hosted by Australia on a New Zealand page. You already have individual state pages, so this functionality exists. Our New Zealand database has very limited search capabilities. The listing is basically by year, by person, with no ability to search by category or topic. Potential fellow applicants cannot easily search for existing or recent Churchill projects in their subject area. We believe that New Zealand fellow interests will also be stimulated when receiving the Australian Fellows communications, which it can easily happen once we have our fellows on your database. We're currently canvassing privacy and opt-in and opt-out functionality. New Zealand fellows will hopefully receive invitations to the Churchill conferences and events. With the increase in virtual events, which I'm sure will happen, this should actually bring us closer together and make the distance across the Tasman reduced. We'd like to be able to share collaboration and ideas between the two trusts. This should also assist us to establish a New Zealand Fellows Association by driving increased interest and also a model to copy. So the potential medium-term options: establish a subsidiary New Zealand Charitable Trust to undertake fundraising and promotional events for the Trust. Our longer term options: become independent of the government, repeal the Act, and extend and develop the New Zealand Trust entity to take over all the functions established under the 1965 Act and actually strengthen the links with Australian Trust and grow in our own right. This operational collaboration, while this sounds challenging, there are actually a number of quick wins that we're exploring. Using modern technology, the user interaction would appear seamless across the 3 platforms. We already have a New Zealand landing page outside of DIA. This is generally where applicants first land, both those looking to apply and also those seeking further information. For reports, this will link straight through to the Australian search engine. They're looking for existing reports on their topics. They'll be able to search by category and by topic. And I guess wider, they will also be able to pick up the work that's been done in the Australian area on these topics. And then when they want to apply, both the Australian website and the New Zealand landing page point the applicant straight back to the DIA website link. We have to apply through the DIA at the moment because they are the ones that have the mandate to manage the administration of both the trust and the grants. The process for change seems glacially slow until we look back and see how far we have come. DIA working with the board to work up a strategy document and a vision. The willingness of DIA to consider the New Zealand Fellow reports to be hosted by the Australian Trust website. The acceptance by the Minister of the possibility of repealing the 1965 Act. These provide assurance that the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust can continue to help everyday New Zealanders to pursue their passions and connect with like-minded communities overseas in the spirit of the original aims of the Trust. Where else would passionate New Zealanders get funding? To travel to Mexico and study conservation methods for the monarch butterfly? Or to write a book on the journey of the Fijoa from South America to New Zealand? Or explore beekeeping in Tonga? It is important that we continue to promote a fellowship as an exciting opportunity available to all New Zealanders to enhance the visibility and credibility associated with being a Churchill Fellow and to promote the benefits that the Fellows contribute to their communities. I'll now stop my screen share. And say thank you very much. Thank you. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou, tina koutou katoa, e noho rā.
Thank you, Dave. Hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Richard, and apologies sincerely to everyone. I thought the technology was working so well, and although I'm loath to blame, apparently my problem this morning was the local network of in my immediate vicinity. Anyway, Adam came to my rescue by driving around, and through a different means of collection, I'm now hooked up via his computer. So I missed the presentations by Margaret and Dimity, so my apologies there. And what you heard from me was a fairly clunky pre-record version done a few days ago when we still had a hybrid convention in mind. But also I was going to add this morning in my presentation, and I certainly want to mention it, that the Trust has decided that for our next application round, which hopefully, as I said, will be next year, that there will be a fellowship delivered in the name of the Queensland CFA, and that's in recognition for the absolutely amazing work that's been done in the preparation for this this convention. So the CFA will be invited to choose a topic if they wish, and they certainly will be invited to select the fellow out of those who are selected by the Queensland Selection Committee and the National Board on merit as one that will wear the mantle of the Queensland CFA Churchill Fellow. So we don't have a great deal of time. I can see here a number of questions, and I'll see if we can get to a few of those. And I can now see Margaret, Joy and Dimity on the screen as well. So belated good morning to you as well. One question that I can answer is, it might have been from Cat Short, I think, about the links to the fellow essays that I mentioned in my address on the website. I think we'll. I've actually cited that link in the written version of my speech, but we'll make it a little bit more prominent on the Trust website so that everyone who wants to go and look at those 3 excellent essays can do so. So this one is also really related about the future, and I'll just read it. Applicants need to specify that they can't get the knowledge they seek within Australia. Then will future applicants perhaps have to prove that they can't conduct their research online? This could free up funds to support projects that can't be conducted online for whatever reason. Look, I think it's probably difficult to be trying to comment on the go, as it were, about possibilities that may or may not work out for us in a post-COVID resumption of fellowships. What I'd prefer to do, I think, is just note all of the comments and suggestions that come up either already or subsequently, and we'll weigh those up as we're considering a return to another application round next year, and if so, what sort of form that will take. I'd really emphasise, though, that our first priority is to work with the existing 2019 and 2020 fellows to make sure that they've have the opportunity to travel and to complete their undertakings, and so that will be the immediate priority for our staff. So I'm not sure that I'm seeing any other particular questions there, so I might instead Margaret, if you, having listened to the whole session, Margaret, is there any additional observation that you'd like to make? And perhaps while you do that, I'll have a better search through the chat session to pick up any questions.
Thanks very much, David. Well, of course, the observation that everyone is making is that a collection of Churchill Fellows really does need its own collective noun. Probably Tim Lowe could come up with one that you get from Birdsong, but they sing, and they sing like canaries. They tell us what needs to be fixed, and they usually set about doing the fixing as well, unlike the canaries who sometimes die. I think that I am surprised at how well this has gone. I know we're absolutely obsessed with the technical difficulties of it, but when you contemplate just how hard it has been to put this together virtually at the last minute, I think it's been brilliant. And that really seems to me to go to the essence of Churchill. We really don't give up. We keep on going. And I think, David, you might get the prize for keeping on going. I thought I was ready for it. I've had 5 consultants to try and fix up my internet access, none of whom was successful. So nothing more from me, except I'm looking forward to the sessions after morning tea and then after lunch. They should be as good as this morning's or better. And yesterday's were wonderful.
Thanks, Margaret. Yes, I think you and I sort of vie for being bottom of the technology proficient scale, but certainly it was frustrating for me this morning, and particularly after having listened through yesterday, which I thought went really well and the technology worked. And again, I can't avoid reiterating my admiration for the organising committee. in these challenging circumstances. So if Dimity, is there a question for you from one of our participants? I'm interested in what the highest priority achievement goal there is in the area of bionics. If there was no shortage of resources, what would be the holy grail of bionics to achieve?
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for whoever wrote it. Emma, I'd really be most excited to see that the work that's happened in Bionics Queensland and in the Bionics groups before that, we would be able to achieve a faster acceleration of the devices that are already absolutely fabulous things that are already working along in different areas of Australia, if we would be able to receive enough funding to accelerate the best of them faster. That was always the goal in starting the Bionics groups, and I do believe that we are sitting pretty as far as an international sense to be able to build on that wonderful work of Professor Graham Clark, where he first successfully commercialised a neuromodulation device to be able to help people with all sorts of formerly untreatable medical disorders. And I think if we could work out a way to reward those people who were working on the best devices, which is exactly what the Bionics Challenge is for. It's only its second year this year, so we want to keep that going, and we want to be able to seek out these great projects and those that work on the big questions of life. And
thanks, Dimity. Another question from Damien Salmon is, what are our views about how we conduct future fellow conventions? Well, again, I guess let's get through this one first and give our Queensland Organising Committee a chance to have a rest. I think these conventions are just tremendous opportunities for gathering of people and sharing of experiences. The previous one in Tasmania was the same. It's just a great pity that that COVID has got in the way of the completely face-to-face version of the convention. We will have another convention in the normal time interval. And largely it'll be up to that organising committee to determine themes, to nominate speakers. You'll see that the array of speakers for this convention is appropriately heavily skewed towards Queensland fellows, and I think that's the way it should be. The other element that, of course, and it was typified by the formation of the Indigenous alumni last night, is that we see that type of formula being much more widely possible in other spheres of professional interest. There was one that was formed at the time of the Tasmanian Convention, I recall, and so I think we'd like to develop that concept further. But again, we'll set out details of the next convention as soon as possible. I guess, given where we are now, there won't be the ritual passing of the cigar, the Churchill cigar, from one organiser to the next today, but we'll probably be able, Ken, to do that virtually as well, I'm sure. So I think just one final question that I've seen here is just making some reference to the recent change of badging and name that has gone through with the UK Trust. And so let me just read out some words from that, from Catherine Short. I'm aware that the UK Churchill Trust may be undergoing a name change as a result of some of the negative press in relation to Churchill being judged poorly by today's standards. to wonder whether the UK Trust has discussed this with its Australian and New Zealand counterparts to assist in how this is managed in the two countries. Well, the short answer is yes, there has been discussion with our trust quite extensively between Adam, Davey and his UK counterpart. Not sure about whether that has extended to New Zealand as well. Of course, the UK Trust faces, although we operate in a broadly similar manner, it faces different challenges. It has, for example, recently decided for the second year in a row not to have an application round next year. We are not, or not yet, or not necessarily in that situation. So I think also, as the question intimated, there has been a little bit more pointed criticism of Churchill in the UK by some of the groups that were active last year, and you may have seen the example of the defacement of the Churchill statue in Parliament Square as part of that. So I think it's a moving feast a bit. We have considered carefully our response to that criticism, and I summarised that in my address. The UK Trust differently. There has been some criticism of it that it has downgraded the importance of the reference to Sir Winston Churchill in its recent rebadging and name change. But subsequently, there's been a number of statements, particularly from the Churchill family, to assure that that is not the case at all. And of course, as many fellows here know, one of Sir Winston's grandsons, Jeremy Soames, is the chair of the UK Club. So that's a slightly long-winded answer to that question. I think we are now, unfortunately, out of time. So it remains for me as a sort of stopgap moderator, trying to cope with Richard's audio uncertainties, to thank everyone for their involvement, particularly Joy from New Zealand, Dimity and Margaret, and now to hand back to Ken to adjourn this session and advise for the next. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard and David, and all the speakers. I think you all did a wonderful job considering the technological challenges that session faced. Richard in particular, apologies. I know it's not nothing we could do about it. It was an internet connection issue at Richard's end, and nothing he could do about it either. So terribly sorry for that, Richard. And David, thank you for stepping in and trying to make the best out of that chat at the end. You did really well. It's always a pleasure to listen to Margaret and David. They're always so thoughtful in their comments. And it was a great pleasure to hear from Joy today as well. So it's a great pleasure to have New Zealand Trust as part of this convention, and we look forward to that relationship continuing. And Dimity's presentation was just amazing for a non-medical person like me. It's really impressive. What else did I want to say? So I've said my apologies to the speakers. Oh, thank you, David, for that kind offer of a CFAQ fellowship when they open up again. Next time. That's really, really nice, and we'll be thrilled when that is awarded. And I can confirm that the passing of the cigar ceremony will actually happen tonight at dinner. So we've actually got a representative from South Australia that we've managed to wrangle in place of Cat Short, the president. So it's all good. So thank you all. That was really great. We will now break for morning tea. We'll reconvene around at 11 a.m. Again, the wonderful catering we had arranged for you has gone to the Wesley Mission, so it's being enjoyed by others. And I really hope you've enjoyed this session. when we reconvene at 11, you'll have a virtual MC, which will be Rose Clapham from the Trust, and she will help you navigate through the different concurrent sessions. And then I'll pop back on at the end of the concurrent session after lunch to say my farewells. So we will see you then. Bye, everyone.